Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 6 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
Cole twisted to keep his body between Rain and the shower of gravel. Her thin silk gown wouldn't have offered much protection from the hail of rock. Small stones bounced off his armor and stung his bare hands and head. The explosion had sent them flying away from the royal box. "Get off me!" Rain tried to push him aside, but he held his place above her until the stones stopped hitting his back. Cole rolled to his feet and spun around to see a river of beastmen pouring through a 10-foot-wide gap in the castle wall. The bleachers in front of the gap lay in shattered ruins. Arms and legs jutted out from the rubble at unnatural angles. Beastmen roared, men shouted, and over it all rang the familiar sound of steel on steel. The worst of the fighting appeared centered on the royal couple. A knot of beastmen surrounded the king, queen, and their bodyguards, while knights and soldiers attempted to cut a path to the surrounded royals. Cole didn't know what to do. He wore only a leather vest and carried no weapon. If he tried to charge into the fight, he wouldn't last 10 seconds. "What's going on?" The princess's demanding tone drew him back to the moment. "We're under attack. You need to get out of harm's way." Before she could say anything, Sir Garrus came running toward them. "Cole! Princess Rain, are you two hurt?" "We're fine, sir." "Where are my parents? Where's Callion?" Rain's voice rose with each question, and she appeared on the verge of losing control. Sir Garrus grabbed Rain's shoulders and forced her to look at him. "Your parents are surrounded and cut off from the keep. The other knights are trying to get to them. My priority is getting you inside and out of danger. Now let's go." Howls echoed over the din of battle. Cole looked back in time to see a pair of wolfmen, hatchets in each clawed hand, lips peeled back to reveal dripping fangs, charging toward them. Their luck had just run out. "We're out of time." Cole took Rain's hand and turned toward the castle, not giving her a chance to object. Sir Garrus brought up the rear, keeping between them and the charging wolfmen. Cole trusted his mentor to handle a pair of mangy wolfmen and focused on getting to the keep door. They had a clear path. If they hurried, they might make it inside before the beastmen penetrated deeper into the grounds. "Callion!" Rain pulled away from him and ran to the right. Callion cowered behind a line of men-at-arms standing shield to shield against a dozen saber fangs, their curved, razor-sharp eye teeth gleaming in the sun. At least he was staying out of the real soldier's way. Rain raced toward her whimpering champion like he offered some protection. Much as Cole wanted to leave them to the fate they deserved, he couldn't. "Sir Garrus!" Cole's mentor finished the second wolfman with a thrust through the chest and turned toward him. Cole pointed toward the fleeing princess. Sir Garrus ran to him. "Stupid girl. When you get a hold of her, don't let her go this time. Come on." They ran toward the shield wall. Cole paused long enough to grab a short sword out of the hand of a dead soldier. He tried not to look too close, but he glimpsed the gash in the man's torso. It didn't look like he suffered long. They ran on, but halfway to the shield wall, a massive 7-foot-tall boar-man charged them. Sir Garrus spun to face it. Cole skidded to a halt and turned to join his mentor. Sir Garrus shouldered him aside. "Get the princess. I can handle this." Years of training had Cole obeying the order before he had time to process it. He'd taken 4 strides away from Sir Garrus before he realized he'd abandoned his mentor to fight a bigger, stronger enemy on his own. Cole didn't look back for fear of seeing Sir Garrus in trouble and having to choose between obeying his orders and helping the man he considered his second father. Rain reached Callion and wrapped her arms around him. A moment later, 2 soldiers went down under the saber-fang's scimitars, leaving a gap in the shield wall. A saber-fang lunged through before the survivors closed the gap and locked their shields. Callion thrust Rain toward the oncoming monster and ran the opposite way. Worthless coward. Cole leapt at the saber-fang. The monster had its attention on Rain, and Cole hit it from behind, driving his sword through the base of its skull, killing it instantly. He wrestled it to the side so it wouldn't collapse on the princess. Rain was staring at Callion's back as he ran as far and fast as his scrawny legs would carry him away from her. Her legs wobbled, and she fell to her knees. Having your one true love use you as a human shield while he escaped would do that to you. Cole kept his face impassive as he reached down to the princess. We need to go. She took his hand, her eyes unfocused, her expression lost. He pulled her to her feet and looked around for a safe place. The soldiers had pushed the Saberfangs further away from them. All around the courtyard, pockets of men battled ever-increasing numbers of beastmen. More of the vicious brutes poured through the gap every second. Cole hadn't known there were that many beastmen in the world, much less in Corinthia. Cole! The sound of his mentor's voice calmed his racing heart. He turned to find Sir Garrus trotting toward them, his armor sporting a few new dents, but otherwise no worse for the wear. We need to get her out of here. Yes, sir, but I fear we've lost our window of opportunity. Cole pointed to a mixed group of 20 beastmen between them and the keep. The monsters stood between them and the door, but made no move to attack. It appeared to Cole that someone had sent them to keep anyone from escaping. No way we can break through a group that size. We need more men. Sir Garrus looked around the courtyard. What about my parents? Rain's voice trembled. Sir Garrus looked down at her and shook his head. I don't know. The others are trying to get to them, but the beastmen just keep coming. My concern is your safety. A group of young knights ran toward them. Cole tapped his mentor on the shoulder and pointed. A dozen first-year knights stopped a few feet away. A year ago, they would have been competing against Cole in the tournament. Now they were about to take part in a more serious contest. Sir, one of the young knights said, we heard the sounds of battle from our post on the far side of the keep. What should we do? I need you to help me break through that group of beastmen. Sir Garrus pointed toward the monsters blocking their path. We need to get the princess inside. The young knights looked at Rain with wide eyes, as though seeing her for the first time. We're with you, sir. Just say when. Sir Garrus nodded and turned back to Cole. He took the gold amulet from around his neck and put it over Cole's head. This may offer you some protection. We'll form a flying wedge and hit those beastmen. Your job is to protect the princess and get her to safety. Do you understand? Cole nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He understood all too well. Sir Garrus didn't expect any of them to survive. Nothing else would have gotten him to remove his knight's amulet. Once you get inside, the princess can show you the way to the escape tunnel. Get her to Celestia. That's the only place she'll be safe. Sir Garrus clapped him on the shoulder. You can do it, Cole. I know you can. Yes, sir. Cole got the words out without his voice breaking. Sir Garrus took his place at the tip of the wedge. Cole and Rain stood behind him with knights closing around them. Cole held Rain's cold, trembling hand in his left hand and his sword in his right. 2 feet of blood-caked steel seemed woefully inadequate, just like Cole himself, for what he needed to do. Charge! At Sir Garrus's command, the wedge surged forward. The heavily armored knights hit the massed beastmen like a god's hammer. Through the gaps between the knights, Cole watched beastmen fall away from their path. The wedge smashed through the first row, then struck the second. They'd lost enough momentum that the second line held. Shouts and snarls mingled in the air with the copper stench of blood. Swords rose and fell as the knights tried to cut a path to the keep. A young knight on Cole's right went down, and a wolfman thrust his muzzle into the wedge. Cole stabbed the beast in the eye, and it fell back howling. Ahead of them, Sir Garrus pressed to the left, and the knight beside him pressed right. A gap opened, and Cole had a clear path to the door. He needed no orders. He squeezed Rain's hand and darted out of the wedge's protection and ran toward the keep. Rain stumbled beside him, and he caught her by the waist before she could fall. Cole pressed on, 50 feet to go. He kept his arm around the princess to keep her upright. They reached the door, and Cole paused long enough to kick it open. He pushed the princess inside ahead of him, then turned back to see how the knights fared. Cole's heart swelled. Impossible as it seemed, the knights held the edge. Half their number lay on the ground, but Sir Garrus led the rest with a ferocity Cole had never seen in his mentor. The elder knight hammered the beastmen with his longsword, and it seemed with each swing a monster went down. Too many beastmen still stood for the knights to disengage, but it wouldn't take much more for the brutes to break and run. Cole's eyes widened when an apparition out of his worst nightmares rode onto the battlefield. A knight in black Gothic armor sat astride a midnight horse with burning crimson eyes. The knight carried in one hand a wide, serrated blade Cole doubted he could have lifted with both hands. The dark figure rode up behind Sir Garrus, who, focused on a pair of saber fangs, didn't realize death had appeared behind him. He tried to shout a warning, but the horror of the black-armored figure stole his voice. He watched in mute terror as the knight ran his blade through Sir Garrus's back, punching through his heavy plate like it amounted to nothing more than the thin silk Rain wore. The heavy blade burst out the front of his mentor's chest, blood spraying, and Cole found his voice. He screamed in inarticulate pain and rage. The knight's great helm turned toward Cole, and burning, venomous eyes met his. Cole knew those eyes would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. The knight lifted his sword with Sir Garrus's body still impaled on it, and pointed toward the keep. Cole slammed the door and slid the bar in place. "Where are the other knights?" Rain asked. Cole had forgotten all about the princess. He turned toward her, his vision blurred. Cole dashed the tears from his eyes. He'd have time to cry later. And after he cried, he'd find that black-armored bastard and carve him into bloody chunks. "They're dead, princess. We're on our own now." Zarin watched his army of beastmen pour through the gap he'd blasted in the castle wall. His saber fangs, lithe and strong, with 12-inch curved fangs matched by the heavy curved swords in their hands, led the way. No human could equal their power and grace. Behind them came the bulk of his army, a mix of wolfmen and boarmen. They'd washed the defenders away in a tide of blood. If the corpse that served as Zarin's host had lips, he would have smiled. When the last of his army had entered the castle grounds, Zarin followed. He'd taken a single step through the gap when a flash of white light forced him to look away. A tingle ran through his undead spirit at the sudden release of light magic. He traced its source to the largest mass of fighters. The royal family must have made its last stand there. He made his way through the fallen bodies of dead and dying beastmen and humans. The aura of pain and death fed the darkness around him. Zarin drew the power in. He never felt stronger than in the aftermath of a battle. For all he gloried in that power, it still seemed a pale thing compared to the old times, before the darkness's binding. Not much longer, and all the centuries of work would at last bear fruit. Zarin reached a circle of beastmen standing on rough stone. In the center of the circle, surrounded by scores of bodies, the royal sword thrust straight down into the ground, held in place by the stone. The dead king's hand still wrapped around the hilt, his final act thrusting the sword deep into the earth where its magic transformed the ground to stone. Beastmen cringed away when Zarin stepped between them onto the stone. The undead dark caster tasted the lingering magic swirling in the air. Something had gone wrong. The power tasted too strong, too active. The royal family's death should have caused the blade's power to go dormant.
"Is it time to break the blade?"
Zarin turned to find the Black Prince dismounting from his night stallion. The demon-bound knight sounded eager as ever to shatter one of the holy swords. "Something seems different about this one." The Black Prince brushed past Zarin and strode toward the shining blade.
"You worry too much, caster."
The Black Knight grabbed the hilt of the sword and bore down on it with all his considerable might. The sword flexed perhaps a quarter-inch. Despite his grunting and straining, he couldn't budge the blade even a fraction more. When his strength finally gave out, the Black Prince released the hilt. It snapped back straight. Power crackled, and the prince went flying into a pair of wolfmen, sending all three sprawling to the ground. Zarin looked down at his servant. "And you, I think, worry too little." The Black Prince clambered to his feet, the heat of his anger forcing the beastmen nearest him to flinch away.
I will not be made sport of, even by you.
Zaren's dead black gaze locked with the knight's acid yellow eyes. He couldn't allow anyone to question his power or threaten him, no matter how valuable a servant. Even a moment of weakness could cost him everything. The dark didn't answer to weaklings. Zaren gestured and called to the dark. The binding that lashed the demon spirit to the prince's soul loosened. The Black Prince fell to the ground, screaming as the demon tore at his soul in an attempt to get free. Zaren stood over his knight.
Who is your master?
The prince screamed again and again.
Who? You are.
The prince gasped the words out between screams.
Please, master, the pain.
Never forget. Zaren gestured again, restoring the binding. The Black Prince rolled onto his back, gasping. Zaren left the broken figure and walked over to the bodies of the royal family. The king and queen both bore horrific wounds. He poked aside several bodies nearby. The princess's body was missing. Zaren rounded on the Black Prince, who had regained his feet.
Where is the girl? I don't know, master.
He cocked his helmed head.
2 young people made it into the keep, a boy and girl. I believe the boy's a squire, judging by his clothes. I didn't get a good look at the girl.
Zaren seethed. Somehow the princess had eluded him. The sword wouldn't break until they killed the entire royal family. He got himself under control. She had escaped for the moment, but had nowhere to run. His army had the keep surrounded.
Break down the door and find the girl. We can accomplish nothing more here while she lives. An extended search will put the beastmen on edge, the prince said. Set guards all around the keep, then send the bulk of the army against the city. I don't care what it takes. Find the girl and kill her. I'll see to it myself, master.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you liked what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesewisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next time, goodbye.